welcome to the Borealis Experience. I'm your host, Aurora, and I'm very happy and excited to have Robin Parenteau-Walker with me today. We will be talking about a very sensitive topic, a topic of adoption and how being adopted is, very, very tough for some people, easier for others. But the search for identity is what unites pretty much every person on this planet who has been adopted. And I'm very happy that Robin is here with me. He will be walking in the coulees in Lethbridge, and I have a beautiful view of Mother Nature there. Awesome. And he will be talking about his experiences and what he has to share with us about this beautiful topic. Thank you so much for making the time and for taking us on a walk with you today, Robin.
Absolutely. And thank you for inviting me, Aurora. I'm happy to be here. And as I mentioned earlier, this would be my first podcast that I'd be speaking on. So maybe not as polished as I could be.
Yeah, we're not going for polished here. We're going for raw and honest. So I'm very happy that you're here, and I know you will be shining brightly. I would love to share with our listeners here a little bit about your background. And as you might know or can imagine, the more you go into detail, the better it is for people to being able to relate to you and feel less lonely with their experience.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I go by Robin. I was born and named Robin at my birth, actually. I didn't really find anything out about that part of my story in detail until just a couple of years ago. Most of my life, I knew I was born in Foothills Hospital in Calgary, 1979. I knew that I was adopted. I knew that my parents were still children, really. They were 15 and 16 when I was born. So they both would have been 15 when I was conceived. And, the world was different then. My mom didn't have a lot of support. And back then, having children that young and out of wedlock, was frowned upon. So the decision to put me up for adoption, made a lot of sense. My adoptive parents told me when I was young that I was adopted and what they knew of the circumstances around that. And it all made sense to me. And I didn't consciously feel slighted or unwanted or anything. I had a pretty normal upbringing for the time. I've lived in Lethbridge since kindergarten age, maybe the year before that. So, my experience that way was pretty normal. And it never even really occurred to me, to look for my birth parents until I found out I was going to be a father. And that didn't happen until I was 30. So, and at that point, I applied, one of the provincial buildings here in the city. I filled out some paperwork, and, a while later, I got an envelope in the mail with some mostly redacted documents that didn't really tell me much more than I already knew at that time. And sometime after that, I think it was maybe a few years after that, the laws in Alberta changed for adopted persons and parents of adopted children, where they could apply for information and there would be more information available to them without the consent of the other party. So at that time, I reapplied and I got some more documents, less redaction. So I can't remember exactly, but I think I found out my mom's name at that point, and actually I did. And this was around 2012, I think, 13. And so I looked in the Calgary phone book. So I found out my last name, or her last name is Pronto. And although I didn't know how to pronounce it at that time because I had just read it. And I looked in the Calgary phone book and there was like 3 pages worth of Prontos. So I wasn't about to start calling them. And, that just seemed like a lot of effort for me for what possibly could have been nothing. And I believe I looked on Facebook and I didn't find anything. And, maybe just did a Google search or whatever. And that was that. And kind of left it alone. And shortly, right around that time, I had my second child. And then a year and a half after that, my third and last child. And again, it was nice to know the information I had, and I didn't really think too much of it. And then early 2019, I was recently separated and I got laid off, and I decided to take the month of February off, and I considered, what's something I put off for a while. And so one of the things associated with my birth, I guess, is that my mother is Métis, and when I was younger, I had Métis status, and I used that to access some funding for college. That would have been back in about 2004, 2005. And then sometime after that, I'm not sure if it was the provincial government or if it was the Métis Nation or who, but they updated the requirements to obtain Métis status in Alberta, and part of the requirements now included genealogical information, which, given my situation, I didn't have. And so for a while there, I'd lost that status. And so in February, I decided, well, that's maybe something I'll look into, like see if I can find things out there. So I went down to the local Métis office in Lethbridge, told the lady my situation, and she instructed me to come back the next day, that there'd be a woman there that we could go through some genealogical records and see what we could find. And so the next morning, as I was sitting having breakfast, and I had my stack or my 2 folders anyway, and I was leafing through my documents, and came across the document with my mother's name on it, and had my phone there, so I opened up Facebook, typed her name in, and this time she was there. And I creeped her profile a little bit just to confirm before I reached out to her. And then as I was looking at her profile, I saw there was a woman listed as one of her sisters. And so I decided to reach out to her instead. And I can't remember exactly what I told her. I still have the message on my phone, though, if I wanted to go back to it. And her initial response to me wasn't like, what are you talking about or whatever. So I knew that I was on the right track there. And so she got in touch with my mom, who was at work. And then she got back to me, and my mom and I started texting through Facebook Messenger from there. And later on that week, we talked on the phone and then made arrangements to meet in person. So I found out that she was living in Leduc, and I had 2 younger sisters, and through one of them, 2 nephews, and a whole bunch of cousins, 5 aunts, 2 uncles, one who passed a couple of years prior. And so in mid-February, I took my oldest son up to Edmonton, to West Edmonton Mall, and we did the water park and a little bit of shopping. And then we went and met my mom and one of my sisters and my nephews for dinner that night. My youngest sister was living in Red Deer at the time, and she couldn't make it up, but we were able to connect with her on our way back to Lethbridge at the end of the weekend. So, I guess, meeting her, meeting my sisters, it was just, it just felt really normal. Like it felt like home, right? Like I just I connected with them pretty easily. We had things in common, perspectives. My one sister talking about like raising children, and we had a lot of same ideas. And I brought up a bunch of childhood photos and stuff with me. So we were all going through pictures, and my mom had, pulled out a bunch of pictures. So, a lot of the genetic resemblance was apparent, right, between like my children or me when I was young, and my sisters and nephews and aunts and uncles and all that. So it was a really positive experience for me. And then it opened up a lot for me that I'd been carrying all that time that I didn't realize consciously, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that gets in there unconsciously, especially like I was adopted right from birth. Mm-hmm. So, I found out a lot of these details, obviously, after meeting my mom. And so she was living in BC when I was conceived. And then when she found out she was pregnant, she moved to Calgary. And she attended a school for unwed mothers, which, again, speaks to the time that we were in back then. And, she was in the hospital for some time after I was born because she was so young. And she wasn't permitted to hold me or anything, right? Like she'd come to the nursery and look at me. But other than, she told me there was one time that the nurses couldn't get me to stop crying, and she was there, and they let her hold me for a little while, and I stopped crying, right? Of course. But, for an infant, to consider 9 months in mom's belly, I can hear her heart, I can hear her voice, I can hear the people that she's with. And then, the first day I come out into this world and all that, like she's just gone, right? Like there's no, again, I don't know all the specifics, but for me to think of my own children and what I know from raising them and well, so far successfully, I think. Mm-hmm. And, I can't imagine what it must have been like for infant me to she's not there, right? And sure, my basic needs were tended to by nurses, but it's not the same at all, right? So there was definitely stuff that I was carrying in my body, trauma from that experience that I wasn't aware of. And even now I'm still processing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, and especially the last part of what you said. That's so, like, I can imagine when you hear that story, and I would say like physical touch is basic need that you haven't received this in the first couple of weeks after you were born, made you feel very like vulnerable, but at the same time also maybe helped you to make sense of how you feel and perceive life. I don't know, now after you realized, okay, you were deprived of physical touch and closeness with your mom, can you like see what it did to you? Like when it comes to physical touch, are you extremely needy now, or is physical touch something that is very difficult for you to receive? Like on that level of connecting with people, do you notice that it did some damage to you?
Now I'm in a pretty good space. I've done a lot of work, as we call it, and I wouldn't say it's impacting me much in the present. But if I look at my younger years, especially like my young adult years, I related very superficially to people, to women in particular, and I wouldn't say physical touch was like difficult or a problem, or I don't know that I was necessarily needy, but definitely like a lot of very short, superficial, primarily sexual relationships as a young adult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. and it can be connected to that. It doesn't have to be, but it certainly can. And how was it for you during your teenage years and your 20s? Did you have a longing, like a search for identity more than others? Because I know that a lot of people who are born in a family with their dad and their mom, they go through the same thing. They don't know who they are. They feel like they're very different to their siblings and parents, and they have to find themselves. Was it like more intense for you than for others, knowing that you were adopted, or was it not really a thing consciously?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I can only speak to my experience, which makes it somewhat difficult to compare and contrast with what others' experiences might have been. From what I can imagine, I know for me, like, I remember one time meeting one of my dad's, I can't remember if it was a friend or an acquaintance or a business associate or what, but, my adoptive dad. And he said something like, he mentioned that I was his son, and he's like, oh yeah, I can see the resemblance. And, in my mind, I'm like, I don't know what you're seeing, but it's not fucking there, man. Yeah. Like, there's no resemblance. There's nothing, right? And that's just it, right? So with all my family, like, we didn't have a lot in common, right? Our interests are like the things I was curious about. They didn't have those same, like I had two older sisters that were both also adopted. And I knew that, it was easy to understand that, yeah, we don't have these things in common because we aren't related in that way, right? Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't mean like, it's not like we never did things together. We did, we played board games and, had movie night and whatever, just like anybody else. But when it came to the things that I was really curious about and I really liked spending my time with, like I was inside of my family, I was mostly alone in that. And I was okay with it too. Like I kept my own counsel. I was pretty okay with like being by myself. Now, that's not to say that I spent all my time by myself. Like I had friends growing up, and I certainly spent a lot of time, at the park and over at friends' places and all that sort of stuff. But again, a lot of those relationships were fairly superficial, right? I never really got into the stuff that really mattered to me with anybody. I never really like expressed things that upset me, or, if I got bullied at school, I didn't bring that home. And maybe that's why, maybe it's, I just didn't want to bother my parents with it. Maybe it's, who knows, for sure. But I can imagine that had an impact inside of all of that, right? Like just being left alone so early, it just kind of carried through. And it was just normal for me to just think it out by myself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And to feel like, yeah, you have to struggle through life when it gets difficult by yourself, and you can't rely on other people, or maybe other people are not really trustworthy. Yeah, it's when I read your post like a couple months ago, I felt so touched because, yeah, you just picture that little baby that's crying for intimacy and for physical touch, or for whatever the mom could provide, and it is cut off of that source of love. And holy shit, like it really gave me goosebumps. And I felt, yeah, it was so powerful of you to share this with the world, with the Facebook world, and that you made yourself so vulnerable. So I have so much respect for you. And I feel that it can help a lot of people out there to know that when you realize something like that, when you hear news like this, and you share this with the world, then people can connect with you on a deeper level. They can understand you and be closer to you. After you posted this post, did you have like lots of feedback from people?
Yeah, I mean, there was there was public feedback on the post, and some people did reach out to me, and some, like, you know, after the fact, just in conversation, would mention what they got out of it, or, you know, I'm discovering more and more people that I know that were adopted that I didn't know, right? And it's not necessarily something you go around asking people, particularly as adults, right?
Yeah. So. Yeah. If you were to speak to someone who still hasn't found their parents and they feel that longing for, to know who they are, that search for identity, did you come up with tools over the years, like before you met your family, your biological family, that helped you out, that made you feel safe and understood? I know last time we talked and walked around, we talked about astrology. Is there other sources that you, like, did you go to counseling or anything you can think of, books or whatever you could recommend to somebody who is still feeling like something is missing in their life because they're not connected to their biological family?
I mean, if I look back on my life, you know, I kind of fumbled through it all, really. And I'd say the first, like, major work I guess one turning point for me would have been right around young adulthood, right? Somewhere like 17, 18. You know, as a teenager, I read a lot of fantasy. I read some like David Eddings, Robert Jordan, Terry, was it Brooks? You know, like dragons and sorcery and you know, fantasy type novels, and a bit of sci-fi as well. And then when I was around 17, 18, I can't remember the exact circumstances around it, but I came across this book. I think it might have been when Chapters opened in Lethbridge. I'm not sure. Anyways, it was called 7 Life Lessons of Chaos. And I think at around the same time, I kind of come across chaos theory and like the idea of fractals and the Mandelbrot set, and I was fascinated by it. And so I read the book, didn't memorize the 7 life lessons, so I can't wrap them off for you. One of them was about like butterfly power, and, you know, the idea that if a butterfly flaps its wings on one side of the world, does it cause a tornado on the other side of the world? And so just the idea of like all these independent, you know, kind of feedback loops that can build into something greater, even though they're not specifically organized to do that. And also the different ways that we kind of reinforce like the status quo through all of our little, you know, individual and yet collective actions of, you know, putting the open sign in the window and you know, going to work and all of that. So that was interesting. And from that book forward, I kind of stopped with fiction. I found reading about the real world to be far more interesting because it mattered. It seemed like to me, whereas stories were fun, but meh. I had a good long while where I didn't even really watch much TV, to be honest, but other than like documentaries and stuff. So I did a lot of just like learning about the world, learning about how my mind works, learning about how my body works, learning about how society works and psychology and different cultures. And, you know, I was raised Roman Catholic. So, you know, religion was something that I was curious about. And, you know, so being raised Roman Catholic, I was presented with that. And then in the making sense of it, you know, I wanted to look at, well, what do other people believe, right? What do other religions teach? And then looking at like the commonalities, to me, that's where we could find truth, right? Like if all of these different religions that were developed in all these different areas of the world all speak about certain things in common, like that's what matters. All the rest of it's just, you know, bullshit that this or that leader put in there to control or whatever, in my opinion. Yeah. And I've since come to apply that same sort of idea to kind of other things I've been studying. But so I guess, you know, just I kind of went off on a tangent as far as your question goes, but I think for any individual in their search for, you know, who they are, I guess, you know, part of that might involve an external, like, find out what you're interested in, right? Find out what you're passionate about, find out what really kind of pulls you forward. And then from there, maybe you can reflect and take it in, right? And look inside. So that would have been the first thing that kind of got me going. But really, through my 20s, I was a heavy drinker and, partied a lot and didn't really do much for my future during that time other than to experience things. And my oldest son, Stephen, so his mom, my relationship with her was really quick all around. I was 28 when we met. I didn't know she was 18. I thought she was like early 20s. She didn't realize I was so old either. So it wasn't until after we started dating that we both found out we were 10 years apart. And it wasn't long after that Stephen was conceived, and then he was born, and then we got married, and we made it just over a year, and we separated and divorced, and that was all not a great experience. But through it, I definitely, like, for me, it was like, okay, well, why did this happen, right? What did I do wrong? Why did I behave the way I did? If that's wasn't my intention or what I was committed to. And I had the luck, or, if you want to call it that, of meeting a gentleman that introduced me to ultimately the work of Werner Erhard, Landmark Worldwide. And so over the course of the following year, I did a bunch of personal development programs offered through Landmark, and developed a greater, I don't want to say understanding, but that's all it's coming to me this time, but understanding of kind of how we perceive and see and interact with the world through filters that have been put in place over time, based on stories that we tell ourselves because of the experiences we've had. So for one story that I might have had since infancy would have been something like that I don't matter, or that I'm alone, or something of the abandonment sort of flavor.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And so doing that work, enabled me to be able to examine first of all, to be aware of my filters, and then to be able to examine them and eliminate them, really, right? Because once you're aware, it's easier for stuff like that to be disappeared. Whereas a lot of people aren't aware that they're operating with these filters in place, and so therefore they think and act like they're perceiving reality directly, and that they're dealing with reality as it is objectively, when really it's highly subjective, and that's why, of course, they can't understand why that person thinks this and this person thinks that, and so on and so forth. Whereas when you can see your filters and are able to dismantle them, then you can also see, and be aware of the filters that other people are operating with. And not that it's my place to do anything about those, but just to be aware that they're there, and that, I can maybe be patient and compassionate and understanding with these people and in my dealings with them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, so that, I highly recommend Landmark's work. It's great. It's not a cult. That's all I'm going to say about it. But there's definitely all sorts of other work out there. I did do some, I think it's called EMDR therapy at one point. I'm not really sure how effective that was, because I got booked in for it before I did the Landmark programs, but I actually did it after. So I feel like the programs moved a lot of stuff in between time, that when I was doing the therapy, the therapist even noted, you don't really seem to need this. So that was kind of interesting to me. And then after that, more recently, so when I separated from my little's mom, that would have been early 2019, later that year, and most of the year following, I did a bunch of work with when I met in one of the Lamplication programs I was in. And the work's definitely not logical. From all the stuff that I've read and everything and understood, it's very it's steeped in some indigenous traditions, and
Robin, 1 second. The connection is not, or the mic is not really good anymore.
Okay, I think the wind's picking up here.
Yeah, now it's perfect.
How about now? Okay, yeah, there's like a breeze picking up, so maybe I'll stick around here.
Yeah, this is perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
So yeah, no, that's all right. Better that than for me to go on at length and all you hear is the wind. So, but yeah, the work we did, like I said, is just I don't want to get into trying to explain it too much because even now I don't really understand, but I do understand enough to know that like there's a lot going on in our bodies that Western science still can't explain, and we know this, and we hold like emotion and things that we haven't processed somewhere somehow in our bodies and different organs, and it's not all mental stuff like a lot of people think. Mm-hmm. And sometimes even just like kind of playing out a scene and like witnessing and seeing and hearing things can shift a lot of stuff, even though it's not actually like real, right? Like I don't have to necessarily sit down and have this heart-to-heart with my birth mom or dad or whoever, but you could almost fake it. Mm-hmm. So that the body is like then able to release whatever it's been holding on to.
Yes. Oh, this is such precious work. Also, when you think about breakups and finding closure, a lot of people like feel like they cannot find closure if they don't talk to the person anymore, or finding closure with somebody who passed or something like that. So it's very precious work. Wow. And how is it called again?
Absolutely. I'm not really sure. I think it's origin healing. Yeah, it wasn't really my introduction to it. Everything wasn't really that formal. I just saw she was posting some interesting stuff on Facebook and started hanging out.
Yeah. No, very, very cool. Thank you so much for sharing. Man, we're coming to an end here already. We have a couple minutes left. I would like to ask you one last question. What was the first like question that you had for your mom that really helped you to connect with her when you reconnected with her? Do you remember?
I don't know if there was like a specific, Q&A. It was just kind of we met for dinner and had a conversation, and inside of that, all of that, I guess just to, and it's like, just thinking about like how it was for her and like being that baby and being born and stuff, like it still triggers emotion for me, which tells me I'm still processing, right? And so sometimes I'll sit in it a bit and then it can be uncomfortable and I'll leave it alone for a while, but it's there. And anyways, so yeah, like really hearing like her story of all of that, right? Like how it was for her when she was pregnant, and just to think about like the choices she was faced with, and how difficult that must have been.
Yeah.
And like, what she wanted for me and for herself, and she couldn't see like that she could do it, and so she did what she felt was best for me, and it was.
Yeah.
And it was best for her and my sisters and everything, but because of the way like our system deals with these things, that's really where the trauma came in. Like I think that we could do adoption in a way where these babies aren't left with this traumatic experience, but I don't know. I mean, that it'd take a lot more compassion than what the system offers today.
Oh my God, yes. Oh, this is like so touching. I wish I could give you a hug right now and say nothing, but we're just meeting over Zoom. So I hope you can feel a virtual hug, and I appreciate you so deeply. Your story is heard and you matter so much. Like your story and to share this the way you did is so precious. And to see and feel how much compassion you have for your mother really shows that you are living from the heart. You know, you don't live and walk around like a victim and make excuses. You face reality and you face the situation with grace, and you have so much compassion for her situation, for another human being out there. And yeah, I have so much respect for you, and thank you so much for making the time and walking with us in the coulisses. I deeply like appreciate all of this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Aurora, and thanks again for having me. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to the conversation I had with Robin. And yeah, if you have any questions and want to reach out to him, I have his link to his Facebook Messenger here in the show notes. I hope we brought a lot of value into your life. And yeah, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast yet, please subscribe. And if you want to leave us a review, share your thoughts with us. Thank you so much, and I will be out there very soon again. Bye-bye.